Go live. Okay, Enrique, can you check that it goes live on Facebook? You don't have permission to live stream? Okay. I am not met. Hello, hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. We are allowing a couple of minutes for people to join, and we're also trying to set things up for our live stream as well. Ray, welcome. It's a pleasure having you here as well.
Hey, Javier, it's good to see you. Welcome everybody who's here. Before we get started, we're gonna give a few more minutes to let a few other people join. In the meantime, if you guys would like, let us know in the chat what business you're in and what you expect to learn today, what you expect to kind of take out of our conversation today. Helps us kind of tailor some of the topics and examples that we'll use to your unique case. Strategy is an incredibly broad subject. So if you let us know kind of what you'd like to see, it would help us kind of tailor some of our examples.
All right. So we'll wait on that for 1 or 2 minutes as we get started. I believe our live stream is also working now. So we're good to go there.
Perfect.
And we'll just wait 1 more minute and then we can get started. Once again, just to make sure that you're hearing us properly, you can share probably your industry or where you're visiting from. That helps us make sure that audio is working fine. And it should, because I can hear you, Ray.
Perfect.
All right, just a few more seconds. Thank you, Fasa Consultant, AI-based strategy in Los Angeles. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Fasa. Thank you for being here. This is 100% live for you, unless you're watching the recording, of course. But if you're here on Tuesday, October 29th, this is 100% live. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to tackle those as we move through the presentation. We are scheduled to be here for about an hour, and it will all depend on whether you have more questions or not. We can always stay a little bit longer. If you need Raymond, a project management consultant, Southern California. Great. Thank you, Ray. Thank you for being here. Right. Ray Fletcher, what do you say if we get started?
Yeah, let's get started. First and foremost, my name is Ray Fletcher, and I'm joined here by Javier Perales. Together, we are here representing Purpose Lab. Javier, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what Purpose Lab is? What do we do? Why do we exist? And what are we about?
Thank you, Ray. Of course. So we got together about 18 years ago now. We're all a series of seasoned professionals. We are all from the consulting world, but basically we found an opportunity for organizations to make sure that their efforts are always properly aligned, properly focused, and that they can work on the right strategy. We come from continuous improvement world, and a lot of those continuous improvement projects and efforts, they just seem to pop up like popcorn without having a specific alignment and connection between all of them. So that was one of the pain points that we wanted to work. And we started exploring strategy a little bit more. And of course, we'll be talking a little bit more about what strategy is. But basically, our objective, Ray, is to empower organizations to be able to reach their purpose, which we'll also talk about what a purpose is, by ensuring that their strategy is tied to that purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the business of helping organizations design, transform, and really challenge their business models and set them up for the future, right? Now, before we begin and dive into this concept, real quick, a very broad and basic definition of what strategy is. It's a clearly defined destination and a plan on how to get there, right? It's as simple as that. Now, obviously, within that, there are a lot of nuances and a lot of definitions. Another important element of what makes up a strategy is the flexibility aspect of it. Of course, if you have a plan and you have a destination in mind, but your plan doesn't go as planned and you're not flexible, you will likely not succeed in your strategic journey. So we want to make sure that we are always looking for adapting our strategy to what our conditions are showing us. And if you kind of imagine just being, on a boat with your team, and having a clear route, well, what happens if people are not, aware of that route? What if responsibilities are not managed correctly? Right? It becomes a lot less about getting to your destination, and it becomes a lot more about staying afloat. And really, this is kind of the parting point between what makes good strategies and what makes bad strategies, is how well they're able to plan, how well they're able to execute their plan, and how well they are able to manage it.
And I like that boat analogy, Ray. Another one that I like is also thinking about a mountain. And if just think that you're at the base camp, right, and you want to get to the top of the mountain, that'll be your vision. That's where you want to get. So you have your starting point, you have the point that you want to get at, and you need to trace a route. But perhaps that route will need to change. Perhaps the environment changes. Perhaps just the weather, the climate, just the track itself, and you need to be able to adjust. But not only that, but as you get closer to that summit, then perhaps your vision will start to change. You will be able to see some other summits. You'll be your whole landscape will be different, and then you will be able to determine what's next, or to determine if you want to change direction for any particular reason. Now, sometimes as you're in this boat or as you're climbing that mountain, you'll find some of the problems that don't allow organizations to get to where they need to go. Right. So some of the concepts that we commonly see with our clients are what you see here in screen precisely: miscommunication. Perhaps the strategy is just too complex and it's not practical for them to work. They have difficulty adapting or making the day-to-day work together with strategy and building the future of the organization, because those are two gears that you need to put together to be able to properly work. And there's also a lot of misalignment in different organizations, and these are some of the problems that we will find. And the idea is to have a structured approach to strategy, Ray, that can help us tackle these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it first and foremost, it starts with understanding where you're at in this journey. I see that some of us here are project management consultants. Maybe you work with other organizations, and really what you want to understand is, where are these organizations at in their strategy, in their strategic journey? We are all in different, parts in that journey. And knowing kind of where we stand will kind of help us plan for the future. And let us kind of go into this session, as we start to present a methodology and a framework and several tools. Lets you know kind of where you're at and how can you use these tools to help you. What we see when we have people walk through our doors at Purpose Lab is three main things, right? It's one or the other. Either someone has a ineffective strategy, meaning they might have a plan, they might have a destination, but maybe it's not working the way that they thought. We see a lot of times what Javier had mentioned was this popcorn effect with projects, right? Projects popping up everywhere. Maybe that can be very ineffective. Complex strategy is another big one. When we build this strategy that is so big that it kind of outpaces the capacity of the organization, that's when you can have a lot of issues. You get people not knowing the priority. You get people miscommunicated about their responsibilities, or you might find yourself or any organization that you're helping with no strategy at all, right? A blank slate. Maybe they have a vision, they have an idea of where they want to go, but not really a true plan that they're sticking to. And for that, you might always be in constant firefighting mode. You might be always looking for the next problem to solve, the next leak to cover. And all of these present several opportunities. They're not the end, it's a journey. And so all of these are opportunities for an organization to look at themselves and say, okay, well, I'm sitting here and I have a strategy, I have a plan, but it's not working. I have an ineffective strategy, right? And knowing that can help you first realize this problem, right? And obviously, what we try to do is what we're going to present is a 5-step framework for us to kind of address these issues, address these opportunities that we're faced with. Here at Purpose Lab, we have this 5-step model, okay? And it's these 5 steps are split up into outer circle, the inner circle, analysis, formulation, and execution. And really, the most important thing that we should understand when it comes to a framework and comes to a model is that we sometimes need to rely on a step-by-step process to get to somewhere. What we like to do is you'll start to kind of gain clarity on what to do, when to do it, and then each step starts to matter. Why don't you explain a little bit more about our strategic model and how it can help organizations unlock their true purpose, right?
All right. And throughout the rest of the webinar, Ray, actually, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be diving just a little bit deeper. Of course, there's not a lot of time to go very deep into each one of this concept, but for the rest of the hour, we're actually going to be covering each one of these 5 steps. But basically, what I like to say here is that there is so much information revolving about strategy. There are so many tools, so many concepts, so many books, so many principles that it can get overwhelming. It can get overly complex. So what we did is we see ourselves almost as if we were curators of this concept, as if we were choosing the right pieces or works of art to put in the right place, the museum. And we structure these different sections for the process you were saying, this 5 stages, right? So we'll start with the outer circle, which is kind of the scaffolding that will help hold your strategy together. This needs to be a tailor-made approach. It needs to be different for every organization. Then we'll also go into what the core of the strategic model is, which is actually the DNA. This is where the organization philosophy lives, but also where we need to connect that philosophy with building the future of the organization. You'll hear some regular concepts that you're probably familiar with, like purpose, vision, mission, values, some of that. But then how do you take those and connect those with building the future of the organization, Ray? Then, as I was saying earlier, you take a look at the summit of the mountain and you say, well, this is our base camp. You need to know where base camp is. So that's where analysis comes in. So once you have the right structure, once you know where you want to go, you need to determine this is where we're starting. That is the strategic analysis phase. And if you see this kind of this middle or center cycle that you go through: analysis, formulation, execution, steps 3, 4, and 5, that is a constant process saying, this is where we are. How are we going to be getting closer to where we want to go? And then, of course, you need to start executing on those plans and constantly analyze if they're getting you closer to where you're going to go. So let us go deeper into each one of these concepts, Ray, starting by the very first one of this, which is the outer circle, or the foundations of the strategic model.
Yeah, and real quick, Javier, before we move on, we really want to get the point across that a lot of these concepts are things that we might be familiar with. And in my personal experience, with a background in business and management, we learn bits and pieces of strategic thinking. We're taught SWOT, we're taught all these tools, but we're rarely taught how to bring these concepts together and how to apply them in harmony. And that's kind of what we're going to lay out today. You're going to see a lot of tools, and we hope that it's not repetition, but kind of reimagining how we put these tools together to give you the outcome that you're looking for, which is a solid strategic plan, a success roadmap, right? So let's dive into the first one, which is foundations. Within foundations, there are 3 things that we're going to look at, and those are our organizational structure, strategic model, and strategic framework. We're not going to dive very deep into each and every one of these, but one thing that I do want to kind of communicate is we want you guys to think about these concepts, right? These are kind of conceptual ideas, and it's very important that we don't just take off running. We're not supposed to just start thinking about, okay, what's the problem? What am I trying to solve? It's first kind of taking a step back and looking, okay, how do I want to structure my strategy, and what do I want out of my strategy? So as we jump in, a lot of times there are some differences between, depending on who you talk to, what the difference is between a strategic model and a strategic framework. And maybe you're looking at this and saying, well, I thought those were the same thing. Maybe you have your own definition for each of those. So let's quickly kind of get these definitions out the way, Carlo.
Right. And a common mistake that happens, Ray, and we see that with many clients, is probably somebody in the organization, top level, founder, owner, CEO, or someone read a book or read a concept, say, we want this, we want to apply that. But it's not always good for the organization, because every organization is different. And as I was saying earlier, there are just so many concepts living out there that we need to make sure that we're able to put them together properly, but also that we're building the right tailored solution or tailored structure for the strategy within the organization. We need to make sure that that solution will help the organization, make it easy for them to continue throughout their strategic planning process, but even most importantly, to execute on that strategy, and then to govern that strategy, right? To be able to constantly adapt. And also that happens here at the very beginning. If you don't choose the right combination of the strategic model, the strategic framework to fit your own organizational structure, then you're starting with a model that's already flawed, right? So organizational structure, which we don't have here on the screen, but that's basically knowing how your organization is organized, and there are different levels. So there are some things that need to happen almost at a corporate level. There are some things that need to happen from a business perspective. There are some things that need to happen operationally speaking. And there are some things that need to happen in different areas or different departments. Every organization, regardless of how big, small, or medium-sized it is, they all have these different levels within the organization. Now, the main difference between smaller organizations and larger organizations, Ray, is that larger organizations have different groups of people that live within each one of these levels. And if we are working with smaller organizations, sometimes responsibilities for these 4 strategic levels are shared within one smaller group of people. But that's one thing to have in mind. And with that in mind, then you can start putting together, as I was also saying earlier, this scaffolding, right? And this scaffolding has 2 main elements: the strategic models that we see on the left of the screen, and the strategic framework. So let's take a look first at what the models are. Basically, Ray, a model is kind of setting up what are going to be the big elements and what is the strategic rhythm that you're going to be needing to keep for organization, how often you're going to be revising your strategic priorities. There are different models. We are presenting 2, and we have a third that we like to work a lot with. So you are probably familiar with some of these concepts. One of them is called the Hasein-Kanri, that we can say is the Japanese model that many organizations have already adopted. It is usually, let's say, a mid to long-term strategic horizon, 3 to 5 years. It does have annual revisions, and it is aligned through a cascading process of setting objectives and then setting those down to a team, and then having the team kind of this play ball and adapting the concept. And it's usually a little bit slower in terms of alignment, but it's really powerful. A newer model, and that's gaining more and more traction, and we could consider these to be almost the American or the technology industry model, is called the OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. Again, this is gaining more and more traction. This has a strategic horizon. It doesn't mean that you're going to be losing sight of the long-term goal, but it suggests that we need to plan in shorter cycles. 3 months is suggested, with strategic objectives that we're constantly revising monthly, and that we can continue to work on those and adjust on those. And then every one of those objectives has its key results that will tell you whether you are achieving those objectives or not. This typically happens top down, but then also there is a very important component of the down to top process, and it fits more of an agile structure. Now, really what we want to do, Ray, is we want to bring the elements from either one of these models and put them together depending on how it better works for the organization. We sometimes work with organizations and say, well, but Javier, if our strategic process takes 2 months in itself, and then OKRs is supposed to be updated every 3 months, then we are only finished our first cycle, and then we already need to update that. Well, of course, that might not be the best case study for OKRs within that organization, but some of the concepts, some of the principles there could still be very useful for that organization. So we kind of like to put together and blend a flexible model out of this too, Ray.
Yeah, the important here is that the literature on these specific models are very clear, and they kind of set it very strictly. But in reality, when it comes to application, they're mere guidelines, right? If I want my plan to be 3 to 5 years out, but I want to check on them on a very short cycle basis, you can do that. If you want a more kind of traditional approach, but you want a more top-down cascading effect, where what OKRs does is it says, okay, well, here's my objective. This is what we want to achieve. Here's the key result that we're looking for. And then that is sent down to a team, and the team now comes up with that strategy to reach that objective. Whereas with Hasein-Kanri, it might be the other way around. It might be, here's the objective and here's the strategy. Can we execute it? Can we do it? Right. So it's a little different about kind of these 4 factors that you're seeing on your screen. These are going to be the ones that affect your choice, right? Your strategic horizon, how far do you want to make your strategic plan? Your revision cycle, how often are you going to check on it? Your alignment process, right? If you're a smaller organization, you don't probably need a cascading model where you're sending these objectives to different levels of the organization. Maybe it's just something more top down, more informal, like, hey, what do you think about this strategy? I want to achieve this. How are we going to do it? So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for, and it really depends on your organizational structure, right? So a lot of this points back to your organizational structure. Let's move on to strategic frameworks. Frameworks are a little different, right? If a model kind of lays out the compartments of your strategy and how it's going to be structured and how it's going to be managed. A framework is more, what do I want out of my strategy, right? There are a ton of frameworks that we can look at. This is just one that we're showing, and this is McKinsey's Three Horizons, designed by McKinsey. And this a framework pretty much just kind of gives you a conceptual structure, gives you a way of thinking, and it guides you towards specific strategies, specific focus areas, if you will, right? And so with McKinsey's Horizons, I love using McKinsey's Horizons. It's one of my favorite. You separate your objectives into three horizons, right? And they're all based on specific bandwidths that an organization might have. Your first horizon might take up the majority of your time, and this is your core business, right? This is what takes up the majority of the organization's time and money, right? And so when it comes to these are strategies that affect the day-to-day operations, okay? Now, it's very important because McKinsey says that's not it, right? You don't stop there. You have to be thinking also in the long term. What I like about this framework is that it doesn't tell you, hey, plan for Horizon 1, plan for Horizon 2, plan for Horizon 3. It says plan for Horizon 1, plan for Horizon 3, and connect with Horizon 2, right? So Horizon 3 is a lot more long-term, could be talking 3 to 5 years away. These are more high-risk strategies, more strategies driven by innovation, right? And we want to make sure that we're investing some time into that, not all the time. We could be investing 20 to 10% of an organization's effort towards that third horizon, but it shouldn't take up the majority of it. So there are many other frameworks that we can look at, and it begins to guide our planning process. We're not using it just yet, right? We're going to use it a little bit later. What we're just kind of taking a look at is the difference between a strategic model and a strategic framework, just to understand those differences. Because at this point in time, maybe it's not the most helpful to have a guideline, to have a framework like McKinsey's, but later on, once we start thinking about our vision and mission, and we start thinking about that long term, about what we can achieve, this is going to be very helpful.
Right. And for an abundance of clarity, Ray, let me just give you a different case for a framework. So there is one that's really well known. That's called the Balanced Scorecard. And basically what it presents are four different perspectives, or we like to call each one of these categories focus areas. So if we were sticking to McKinsey's strategic horizons, Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, each one of those would be a focus area, and that will almost kind of lead us, I was going to say force us, but they more like lead us into thinking for putting together strategic objectives for every one of those focus areas. If you're thinking, for example, Balanced Scorecard, which is another framework, you're thinking about your people, you're thinking about your processes, you're thinking about your customers, and then you're thinking also about the results of the organization. Those are only two. So kind of putting together what happens is we need to have the right custom solution, custom design for every organization during this first stage, rate. And that depends on making sure that we know where we're standing in the organization and how our organization is structured. That's number one. Number two, choosing or putting together the right strategic model, knowing what are the elements that we're going to be needing in our strategy, how often we're going to be revising that strategy. And number three, these focus areas that we're going to be using for our strategy. There are different tools, different principles, different options that you can work in every one of this. And of course, we dive much, much deeper into every one of those if you follow a little bit more of the content that we do or some of our training programs. But here, I hope that we have so far given you a basic understanding of what happens to begin with, or what we want to have in order for us to be able to build this custom approach for every organization, Ray. So that's one of the elements in our strategic model, almost the outer circle, right? So let's move into the next one.
Yeah, the next one is our inner circle. This is the core. We refer to this as the DNA. So we refer to this as the DNA because it works like a double helix, right? A lot of organizations, we see that there's a big gap in vision, mission, and values and how they influence your strategy, right? A lot of organizations might just think that vision, mission, and values stop at just writing them down and just kind of having them displayed. But no, these are elements, they're philosophical ideas that drive an organization forward. The disconnect is, well, how do I use something so large and so big and these big ideas? How do I connect it to what I need right now? What do I need in a year? What do I need in 2 years? And this is what we do throughout this process, which we call DNA. It's two steps. We first focus on the philosophy, making sure that we have a vision, mission, and values defined, right? If you work in a larger organization, you might already have these defined. If you're a newer organization, you might not have these defined. And also, they might change, right? And that's fine, especially for a younger organization. You don't just have to stick to a vision and run with it forever. You can revise it, you can change it, depending on your strategic need, right? The second part of this is building the future. Building the future is also a three-step process. Here, we want to focus on an exercise we call building blocks. And then from there, what we're going to do is extract focus areas and extract our strategic objectives. So at this stage of this process, this is when you're going to start to see your strategic plan come to life, come to fruition, right? You'll start to see it take shape. So let's take a look at first the vision, mission, and values and what those are.
Right, and they're together with the philosophy, Ray. We do want to mention the purpose of the organization. So we don't always need to have a specific paragraph or a specific text to say, this is our vision, this is our mission, these are our values, or even this is our purpose. What we want is to be able to answer those philosophical questions. We want to know, why are we here? That's step number one. That's purpose. Then we also want to know, where are we going to? What's that summit that we're trying to climb? What is it that we're doing? What's our mission? Is basically, how are we getting there? What is it that we're doing? And then, of course, how are we doing that? Those are our values. And there's an example that I love. We have a client and they have this baking shops, pastry shops. And I say, well, our vision is to be this big of a company and to achieve so much in revenue and to have this many sell points with our customers. And we what we do is we bake cakes and we sell pastries and we do that, and the values, we have all this. But what's most important is that they are all connected with a higher purpose, right? And that's very important. And what they do, for example, is all of that they do because they are creating valuable moments for the peoples that they serve, right? So they are creating this memorable moments, this happy moments, because they, when people are sharing a cake, or even when people are sharing a tray of cookies, really what they're sharing is a little bit of happiness, and that is what we want. So we want to be able to answer this element. What is it that we do as a higher purpose? Where are we trying to get? What do we do as an industry or organization? We want that to be broad enough not to scope us as very, very small into any industry, but we also want to state what is it that we stand for, what we defend in terms of values. Now, this exercise, if we only focus on this half of the DNA, Ray, as you were saying, this is only half of it, precisely. This is valuable. This helps for alignment. This helps almost as a motivation for the team. But really what we want to do is we want to be able to connect this with the second half of that DNA helix, which is building the future. So how do we take that philosophy, those elements that what want to achieve, and translate those into specific objectives that we can measure even, and that we know that are going to be taking us closer to achieving that summit, to achieving that vision, to getting us closer to the purpose. Going back to my mountain example, so that purpose might be the North Star that's always up there. You might not always reach it. It probably will be very hard to reach, but it will always be guiding you there, and you always want to be getting closer to that purpose. That's kind of the more transcendental why within the organization. That's one of the concepts that Simon Sinek says in his Start With Why book, for example, right? Then you have the vision. That's the summit of the mountain. That is, if you close your eyes and see, where do I see myself 6 months, 3 years, 5 years from now? What are we achieving? You can picture yourself there at the top of that mountain. And that does not mean that is the end of the journey. Perhaps after that summit, it will come another one, right? But that is going to be your vision. Now, once you have the purpose and you picture yourself in that summit, then you need to start translating that into, how are we going to be getting closer to that? For that, you need to take the focus areas that are coming out of your framework, and this is where things start getting connected with your previous steps. So if you chose the right framework for every one of those focus areas or perspectives, then what is it that you want to achieve? What are your strategic objectives? And what are these large building blocks or milestones, Ray, that you need to be achieving over time to get there? At this point, you're not detailing the plan at all. You're only laying out the bigger elements that will tell you how close are you getting to that future vision that you're stating with your team.
Yeah, for now, really the vision and mission and our values and our overall purpose, it serves as a compass, right? It's supposed to guide us. The challenge that most organizations run into is how do we take that and how do we conceptualize it? How do we put this into context and how can I use it to create a strategy, not just kind of create a plan, but an overarching strategy that will get me closer to my intended vision? Because at the end of the day, that is what motivates. And that's what really makes an organization stand out, right? There's no such thing as small companies, there's only small visions, right? And so, in this next step, in building the future, one of the key elements and one of the key exercises that we like to do is called building blocks. And here it's a creative leadership technique that ties our organizational philosophy with specific milestones, like Javier was saying, that need to be accomplished in order to reach our vision. We like to say that it's a shared vision of the future. That's what we're looking for in this step, making sure that our entire team is aligned on what success looks like, right? You can have your vision laid out, you can have it described in a few sentences, but what does it look like, right? And the moment that we can bring that to life, the moment that's the moment where you achieve alignment. From there, a lot of powerful things can happen in terms of now planning for the future and setting up specific steps to get there. And the most important part of that is that you maintain alignment, right? I say that a lot, but it's because it's one of the most one of the larger pitfalls when it comes to strategy is this part of alignment. So Javier, tell us a little bit about how do we create this shared vision of the future?
Right. So very quickly, and we do want to give you some tips here and there for some of the tools. One of the things that we do with some of our clients, for example, is to help them build a mental anchor. At this point in time, we're not worried about the exactness or the artistic perfection for that mental anchor. So what we do is we ask the team to just close their eyes and have one of them state out loud and imagine that they reached that goal, they reached that vision that they wanted to achieve, and imagine that when they achieve that, a magazine of their choice, they decided to do an article on them, right? So picture what the cover of that magazine would read, what the supporting articles would be, even what magazine that would be. And what we're doing there, Ray, is basically we're helping the team to put together, as I was saying, this mental image, this mental anchor, I like to say, where they say, well, that's what it looks like when we get there. And it doesn't really matter that no magazine, or probably not, is going to be interviewing us for their main piece when we get there. What's important is we are envisioning that success. And that will help us together with a group start putting together and determining, well, if we want to get there, then what are some of the objectives, or some of the building blocks, and then some of the strategic objectives that we want or that we need to complete as a team, as an organization, to get closer to our objective rate.
Yeah, you build backwards. You have that shared idea of what success looks like, and now let's work backwards and try to, let's say that we chose that it's going to be in 2020, 2030. We'll say that this is when we reached our vision. Well, now let's work backwards. What did we have to do in 2029 to get there? What did we have to do in 2028 to get there? And you start to find these common elements that you can take from it, and those become specific focus areas, right? So now in this next step, what we want to do is start really structuring our strategy, start extracting focus areas, and start tying strategic objectives to them.
Mm-hmm. So basically, as we're going out of step number one, the outer circle that we covered earlier, what we want to do there is we want to have the custom or the tailor-made approach for organization. As we're going out of this second phase, rate, basically what we want to have is we want to have clear strategic objectives that are tied to our organization's future. That's what we're looking for. As we have those two elements, that's the outer circle and that's the inner core of our model, then we're ready to go into that middle cycle that we were talking about earlier and start answering, for example, the question of where are we standing? Let's start with the analysis phase.
Yeah, let's dive into the analysis, and we're not going to spend too much time on the analysis, but these are probably concepts that we've heard about. What we want to understand here is we need to diagnose the challenges that the organization faces, and we do that through SWOT. Now, SWOT is not just a list of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You're not supposed to sit down and think, what are our strengths as an organization? You need a framework, right? It's a process, so you need inputs and then you'll have an output. The output of your analysis phase is a SWOT, right? It's not the other way around. It's not a SWOT will give me my analysis. Your SWOT is your analysis, but you need specific tools and you need specific processes so that you can leave with a ton of insight. And I think, Javier, you say that at the end of this process, it's kind of like taking a cannonball into a pool. You should be leaving your analysis phase with a bunch of insight, a bunch of information about your value proposition, about your customer, about your external environment, right? For external environment, we're going to rely on tools like Pestel, on Porter's Five Forces. These are things that we know, we might have heard of them before. And for internal analysis, we want to take a look at inward and help organizations understand what are your capabilities and resources. Okay, let's think about them. Let's list them out. After that, let's understand which ones of these capabilities and resources, how can we leverage specific ones for it to be a competitive advantage for you? Which one of these resources and capabilities present an opportunity or a strength for your organization? And how can we use those and leverage those for future strategies, right?
Right. So it is very important here, right? Because you've already established the strategic objectives in your previous stage. That's basically you clearly laying out what the summit is. What you're doing here is you're determining exactly where you are. It's not the same to say that you're just 3 stone throws away from reaching the summit, that you are 30,000 feet away from the summit, right? So the size of the challenge is very different depending on where you're standing or what your base camp is. And that is what you want to do here. So you said sometimes you need to do this cannonballing into the pool of information for the industry, for the performance of the organization, for the business model itself within the organization. And what we're expecting that will happen is that you'll come out of this phase with all this information, saying this is where we're currently standing. This is where we're strong. These are some of the opportunities, and that is where this SWOT analysis that you're saying comes in very handy. So there is some analysis that needs to happen to the or towards the outside of the organization, the external analysis, towards the inside of the organization. And then you also need to take a look here. It's one of the analysis, but just wanted to make sure that you know, for example, that the business model canvas, this is where we see the business model canvas as a tool connecting with your strategic planning. Sometimes we get asked this question, well, because that is another tool that's gaining a lot of traction, more and more momentum and recognition. There are different stages in which a business model canvas will be used for you, will be useful for you. But here at this particular stage, it will be very, very important that you understand what your value proposition is, what are the things that need to happen for you to be able to deliver that value proposition, how do you capture the value that you're delivering for your user or your customer, and then what does it imply for you to create that value monetarily wise. So all those elements, if this was a theater, Ray, so what's the front stage, what's the customer is looking at, what's happening behind the curtains, what's in backstage, and then also how are we completing that perfect formula. And at the end of the stage, remember, this is the analysis stage, you should be very clear as to where is it that you're standing. Let's say, Ray, for example, that you're given an objective to increase revenue by 30%. It's not the same to say we need to increase revenue 30% if you take a look back and you see that over the last, let's say, 5 years, you've only managed to increase revenue, perhaps the inflation rate, to 5-6%, depending on where you're at. Then say, well, over the last few years, we've been constantly growing at double-digit numbers, right? The size of the challenge is very different for any one of this. And that is what we want to be very clear here as to where our base camp is.
Yeah, it's important too that in the analysis phase, we're not jumping into different strategies. We kind of want to put those in a parking lot. You will have a lot of ideas when you start to dive deep into each of these analysis. But it's important to kind of take a step back and just kind of write those ideas down. But first, go through your analysis. Take some time. Don't do it quickly. Take some time to really understand the landscape around you, your customers, your competitors. And then from there, once you have your analysis and once you walk out, right, with all this information and all this insight, then we can start to move into the formulation. So we're in step 4 and we're barely going to touch on developing strategies, right? Everything else is kind of the pre-work that needs to happen before we jump in and say, okay, I know what my objective is. Now, how am I supposed to get there? And this is what we're going to answer in this phase.
Right. And so this is one of the reasons, Ray, why we don't call this whole process, we don't call it strategic planning, right? Because building the plan is actually just one of the steps that we want to make sure that you're completing. But in order for you to get to the point where you're building the plan, then it's important that you've done all this pre-work. And then after you have the plan, of course, you need to execute that plan. But if we had to choose one phase to say, well, this is strategic planning, it'll probably be this one, the formulation phase. Another couple of concepts here. One of them is sometimes you have an objective and you already know the type of projects and the type of initiatives that you need to put together in order for you to complete that objective. If that's the case, then you don't need to overcomplicate your planning process, your formulation process. You can just go right away and start putting those in an action plan and start working on your strategic projects. If you already know what you need to do to capture the opportunity that you've stated in the objective. Now, what's most important here, Ray, is that in many occasions, what we have as strategic objectives are going to be real challenges, things that we know that we want to achieve. We might have an idea of how to get closer to them, but it's not always very clear what we need to do. And if that's the case, one of the methods that we propose for us to work this formulation stage is through the use of creative thinking, which is very closely related to design thinking as well, Ray. And that starts by posing a creative question, also known as a how might we question.
Yeah, how might we questions are really the parting point when it comes to, hey, look, I've got this problem or this kind of opportunity that it's my first time diving into. How might I solve this problem in a unique way? Like Javier mentioned, it's very important that not all problems that we experience in our organization require creative thinking or outside the box thinking. But if we really want to introduce innovation into our organization or disrupt a specific industry or a specific issue or solve a previous problem in a new way, then you might want to open the door and say, okay, we might have to get creative here. And with creative questions, when it comes to creativity, you don't need to be creative. I definitely didn't consider myself a innately creative person, but it's something that we can practice, right? And we're recognizing that creative thinking and lateral thinking, they're valuable skills to have in the workplace. And interestingly enough, it's also one of the most common elements found within entrepreneurs. It's like very, very successful entrepreneurs always solve problems using kind of unorthodox methods. And so when we start to structure our creative question, it's really simple. It's 4 elements, and you've done all the work up until now. So your creative question should just come naturally. So it starts with how might we, and then you present the problem, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Very specifically describe for who, right? And then if you've done your analysis correctly, you'll have a bunch of insights about your customers. What pain points are they experiencing? And from there, you say, okay, well, how might we solve this problem for this person so that what's the need, right? Fill in the blank with the specific need that target market is yearning for or wanting, taking into account any sort of limitation or any sort of observation that stood out to you throughout the analysis phase. You want to include it here too. And so what you do with that question is that you can propose it to your team and you guys can go through specific exercises, brainstorming exercises, and we'll talk about a few. And I encourage you guys to also look, do your own research into these exercises and learn how you can apply them into your areas of expertise and in your teams, because they can really unlock something very, very exciting and powerful for the organization. So this is how we start, or how might we questions. Just as an example, right? How might we uniquely differentiate? Let's say I own a ice cream truck business, right? And I'm trying to really grow my business, but I'm noticing that, there's not a lot of growth or there's a lot of competition. So, I might say, how might I uniquely differentiate my ice cream truck experience to attract who? Young families, young adults looking for memorable, social media worthy dessert moments, right? While meeting the need for being fun, convenient, and high quality treats, right? So now we're able to really kind of explore specific strategies that can help us answer that question, right? Or how can we extend our brand's reach beyond the physical limitations of our truck, right? Or how can I continue this growth path? These are ways that we can really open up a problem to unique ways of answering. We really try to answer these creative questions through a series of exercises or a combination of exercises. The four that we really like to hone in on are one called How Would Your Mother Do It? Javier will help us explain a little bit each of these: Scaling Ambassadors, Steal Like an Artist, and Blue Oceans and Erica Matrix. So let's just briefly kind of go through one or a few of these, Javier, if you want. And let's not spend too much time because we are running out of time.
Great. So piggybacking really quick on what we were saying, Ray. So typically what we would do is we will build a creative question for every one of those strategic objectives that we are not exactly sure how we're going to be achieving them, right? So we might have more than one creative question for our strategic formulation or strategic planning. As you were also saying, this will require creative thinking because we have a question that now begs to be answered, but we don't have the answers just yet. So we need to put together different techniques. There are dozens of techniques we have in our workbooks. We have about 50 different techniques that we can use at different moments. And we dig deeper into several of these techniques during our training or our coaching programs as well. But here are just some of those that you say, well, this can be taught, this can be trained. How would your mother do it? Is literally well, not literally, but placing yourself mentally in the shoes or someone else and asking the question, how would that person solve this issue? If it was my mother, will probably she'll share it with all her friends, right? All right. So how can we do that? And not only our friends, but that can also probably spark another idea. And you can also think about other characters. So it doesn't always need to be the mother. So how would Batman do it? How would Master Yoda do it? How would Elon Musk do it? There are different ways that we can use this approach to think about a problem and solutions to that problem or that question from different perspectives. That is one. Scaling Ambassador, another quick way of doing it is thinking about this 5-star rating that you sometimes use in these delivery apps and on these rideshare apps. And what would a 5 out of 5 mean for the problem that you're trying to solve or the customer that you're catering to, right? So you take that in mind. Now, then you ask what would a 3 out of 5 mean? And you start identifying things that you cannot let fall because then you'll have a problem. But then you go ahead and think, well, what would a 10 out of 5 mean? How would you know that you're exceeding your customer expectations, right? And that would just going through that process brings new ideas to the table. Steal Like an Artist and business model patterns, this basically embraces the concept that a lot of the ideas out there have already been invented, and what we need to do is we need to draw inspiration from some of them and not really steal them, but get inspired by them, give credit where credit is due, but also kind of take from different industries, different concepts. And what we do is we provide a library of best practices for different areas in the organization. We provide a library of best practices and innovation and inspiration models for the different sections in your business model canvas and different building blocks. So you can use all of those to inspire yourself, or perhaps to borrow some of the ideas and adapt them and tropicalize them to the problem that you're trying to solve. Another one is using this concept of the blue ocean. So not fighting face to face, which ultimately ends in a price war, right? But more like understanding where all the competition is and what do we need to do to find a different space to compete through a different value proposition. And the Eric Matrix basically asks what can be in that value proposition that we're offering, what can we eliminate, what can we reduce, what do we need to increase, and what perhaps could we create or offer differently. So this is just a little rush of these 5 different creative thinking techniques. We have a full module, for example, in our learning program, where we focus on different creative approaches for you to start thinking about strategies, right?
Yeah, excellent. And each of them are very unique in the specific problem that you might have, the specific people that are in your team. A lot of these two are designed to make sure that we get everyone involved. What we want when it comes to the formulation process is really not quality right off the bat. It's actually the opposite. When it comes to ideation, we want quantity over quality. We want everyone to get involved, and we want to make sure that that creative question is always reference to and saying, okay, guys, how are we going to solve this problem? Here's this creative question. There's this strategic objective that we have, and we don't know exactly how we want to reach it. Let's go through these exercises and really be upfront and say, hey, you know what matters here is for us to just put on our thinking caps, our creative thinking caps, and just get quantity, right? Throughout this formulation process, and we're not showing it here, the formulation process works like a funnel, right? It's not just about engaging in these creative exercises and okay, the best idea wins, let's vote. It's about a systematic process, because once you're done, you'll have bad ideas, you'll have terrible ideas, you'll have not so good ideas, you'll have good ideas, and then you'll have very good ideas. But with those very good ideas, we want to make sure that we put them through a test, right? This is what we do in the trail end and the last end of this process of formulation, where we look at impact and feasibility matrices, where we validate and we assess the risks associated with each of the strategies. And so we want to make sure that we understand that when it comes to formulation, it's a process, it's a long process. And it stems first from creativity. It stems first from being open about the fact that we want quantity, and then filtering for that quality as we move further through our formulation. Our next and final step here as we wrap up is execution. Execution is all about putting what we've done into practice, right? We've done the work, we've done the planning. Now it's time for everyone to act, right? So here we have
Right. And
three specific steps. Sorry, Javier, let me just set us up and then you can close us off here. We have our first step, which is launch and communicate. Depending on your organization, you might choose to do this step, you might choose not to do this step, but this is kind of where we recognize that not everyone was involved in the planning process, and we need to be very tactful with the way that we communicate and cascade the objectives and cascade the purpose of the strategy, which in the end is the most important element of our communication. Is why are we doing this right now? Why is it important for us to embark on this strategic journey? The next step is governance, and the third step is change management. Javier, maybe you can talk about those last two ones for us.
yes, so what I was going to say, Ray, is precisely that this might be the fifth and last step in our Purpose Lab strategic model, but this is definitely not the last step in terms of strategy. Basically, what we're doing here, I've been using the mountain example all along. So this is the moment when you are ready to step out of base camp and actually start walking, start climbing up that mountain race. And it is very important to note that this execution, this arrow-like shape, and that's what we try to represent there, it will connect back to analysis and formulation, because you will constantly need to go over that cycle, perhaps not with the same depth, perhaps not always with the same at the same pace, but you will need to be constantly analyzing whether you're getting closer to where you want to go, whether the objective, the summit's still the same that you were aiming for, and you will need to be able to adapt your execution. So it is better to have let's say a so-so plan with a superb execution than a superb plan with a pure execution. You always want to prioritize executing on the strategy, because this is actually what gets the ground covered. Right. So you were saying, Ray, this governance and this change management elements, these are certainly crucial and pivotal stages in the execution. You want to make sure that as you're walking that process, as your team is working on the day-to-day, that you build your strategy so that it's ingrained in your business as usual as well. That whenever you have a meeting, that you are sure that whatever is being covered in that meeting, it properly ties with strategy. And we don't want to be submerged in meetings. We have too many of those already. We just want to make sure that they're properly aligned. We need to be aware that there will be different expectations on the results, on the strategy, on the cost of that change rate. And that is also where change management comes in. So Mr. John P. Kotter is considered the father of change management. He himself first talked about the 8 steps for change management. Now we're talking about the 8 accelerators for change management, right? Because we understand that even though change continues to be this, if it was the ocean, a wave of change is always coming our way. Now the frequency with which these waves come our way, it's just increasing, right? So before you had time to plan for change, now you need to almost build your parachute as you're falling, Ray. So that is what we want to make sure that's happening here, that we have a structure that's ready and prepared to take to work with this concept of uncertainty and to embrace the power that that change can bring to our organization, right? Now, I know that this has, some of it has been a little bit too quick, that we weren't able to delve there, really deep into many of these concepts, but we wanted to keep it brief within an hour. All of the concepts that we covered here, we go much deeper into them in our program, but we do want to thank you for being here. If you have some questions, of course, we have some time for you. You can use the Zoom chat box, or if you're watching live using Facebook, or even if you're using the recording, you can always contact us, shoot us an email, or just leave us a comment there in our social networks, and we'll be more than happy to get in touch with you. Everything that we covered here, we do have a training program for you. It's completely self-paced, so you can cover it at your same pace, at your own pace. It has different master classes, pre-recorded master classes. It has supporting articles. It has study cases. It has a lot of content. It's very professionally put together, edited. And because you're here with us, you are also getting a 60% off. Well, actually, everybody is getting a 60% off if you sign up over the next few days. The QR there on screen will take you straight to the sign up page. If you have any questions, you can always contact us, and we'll be leaving our emails here. Also, let us know if you have any questions. Ray, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add.
No, I think you said it all. I want to thank everyone who's here and everyone who's watching the recording or watching our live stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. Like Javier mentioned, it was very, very brief and very quick. We can, within an hour, there's only enough time to really show you guys what it takes and what kind of steps you need to really take into account when planning for a strategy, but it doesn't give us enough time to dive into our course. So I highly recommend that you guys check out our course. You guys can download our framework guide or our course guide on our website as well, so you can learn a little bit more about the course. Our framework guide is an 18-page white paper for you that really goes through in a little bit more depth into each and every one of the concepts that we talked about here today. But there's only so much time, so I hope that you guys can take advantage of that offer and really take advantage of the course. We have over, I think it's 20 hours of content there, full of templates, full of tools, of unique things that you can take with you and automatically apply right after the first day of really joining our program. So I want to thank you guys. If you do have a question, do leave it here in the chat.
Thank you. Enrique's sharing the course guide there with you on the Zoom chat. If you don't have a question, we're always also happy to hear if there's any concept that you particularly like today that you're taking away. It can be a short sentence, a word, something. But once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing some of your very valuable time, and you will have a great night. We'll stick around for a few minutes to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, I just stopped our live stream. So if you're here on Zoom with us, we're still live.